This little thing right here, this wrong drive flange for the E30 cost me months. About 2 months ago, I did the front big brake kit on the E30, the AP racing kit. It went great, loved it, learned a bunch of new stuff. Moved on to the rear, was supposed to put it in the same video. Instantly, wrong wheel bearings, too small. Was a little confused as I thought all trailing arms on the E30 were the same, but it turns out 316i and 318i, the first year they were made, shared a different trailing arm that was smaller. And not just a little smaller, it was quite a bit smaller, so there was no chance of this working. Ordered the new wheel bearing, came in a couple days, and then I learned that the rear drive flange also needed to be different. I'm not sure how I ordered the wrong ones, but stuff happens. Ordered the new ones, 2-month back order from Germany. Unfortunately, this is kind of the new reality with a lot of this BMW stuff. It's getting a lot harder to source and a lot more expensive. I'm somewhat hoping that has a negative effect on the price of the cars, so they're easier access, but I think modifying or restoring them is going to get quite a bit more expensive. Regardless, got the new flanges 2 days ago. Now we can move on to the rear. I'll show you the front real quick, and then I'll show you what we're going to do to the rear in today's video. To get the rear end together, we have an abundance of high quality parts. So, brake rotors, brake calipers, wheel bearings, parking brake shoes, the rear drive flanges, everything we need to fully restore the rear parking brake with new and restored pieces, brake dust shield, and an E38 brake booster. Together, the harmony of all these parts should allow us to have a very much OEM plus rear end to the E30 that performs very well on road and on track. So I'd like to lay this video out in a way where each step is somewhat instructional. When I was removing the wheel bearings on this car in different projects in the past, I'll look for a video. There's someone who's done one. They show what they need to do, the tools they're using, but not the actual process of it happening. It's kind of just voila and it's done. I'm personally a pretty visual learner and I really like to see it happening. It helps me get a good idea or concept to how to do it myself. So that's what I'm hoping to provide with this video. The first thing we're going to do is the rear wheel bearing. It's the first thing you need to do. And before we do that, the rear flange on the trailing arm needs to be cleaned out. So there's something called emery paper. It's very close to wet sanding paper for all the detailers on this channel, but it's a little bit more coarse. It's a little different. I think it's vented, if I'm not mistaken, but it's going to clean out any of the rust. Then we'll lubricate that with some high temp grease and press our wheel bearings in. But before we do that, I'll show you the tool that I'm using. First, emery paper. This is our emery paper, or emery cloth, as it is officially stated. It looks identical to sandpaper. No different, a little bit more coarse than the wet sanding paper I use frequently, but at the end of the day, it's just some sandpaper. So if we take a look inside the trailing arm where the actual wheel bearing mounts to, you can see there's some light surface rust and a couple little burrs. The emery cloth is going to allow us to remove those. These are steel and it's just exposed as it needs to be. So of course, over time, oxidization and just the air in general, surface rust is going to form. It's not a problem whatsoever. It's just best to clean it up before we put the new wheel bearings in. So that's what we're going to do first. This is a wheel bearing press kit. This is just a random Amazon version. When it comes to tools that I'm only going to use maybe once or twice a year, I really do opt for more affordable options. I do kind of look and see what has the best reviews, but on the much more affordable side as compared to the professional kit that is over $1,000, which is, in my opinion, a little bit of a waste if I'm going to use it so few times. So This has been great for me. It's worked plenty. It has tons of different sizing options, so it works for all of our BMWs as well as some larger hub vehicles as well. I'll leave this linked in the description below if you guys want to check it out. So we have our wheel bearing here. Obviously we cannot press this in with our hands. It's impossible. So what we're gonna need to do, find the spacer from the kit that fits the exact size of the wheel bearing so that it can press around the outer edge where it is stronger. Grab the bolts and a washer. This is gonna thread through the hub, and then you need one for the back that's also gonna match the size. Thread it on to the bolts, and then you have one big nut. This goes on the back, and then we start tightening it, and it slowly pulls the bearing through, seating it into place perfectly. Wheel bearing is in, and the C-clip is in there, locking it in. Took about 2 minutes. That tool makes things so much easier. Like I said, I'll have it linked down in the description below if you want to check it out. Now we're going to move on to something that's a little bit confusing. It has to do with the parking brake and the actual rotor size for this AP Racing big brake kit. I threw on the rear dust shield and the caliper to give you guys a bit of a better idea of what I'm going to be talking about. So the factory rotor on the E30, it stays within this little ridge on the dust shield. Unfortunately, or fortunately, our rotors are quite a lot larger and they're going to protrude outside of that. So what we need to do is actually cut off this outer lip, sand it down a little bit, and then repaint it. You can see it lines up with the caliper real nice. It's actually much better than the factory brake just because it's larger, but the rotor is going to hit this, so we have to remove it. What I'm going to do is leave it on the actual car and hit it with a Dremel, probably the bottom half, and then I'll put it on the vise and do the top half. We'll sand it down, throw some new semi-gloss paint on it. It's not going to look perfect. It's going to be a little jagged, I'm pretty sure, but it should look good enough. And once the rotor's on there, it's going to be hidden. Unfortunately, we can't remove the entire thing because it is how the parking brake retains itself through this hole, and then the springs attach through each side here. So we do need it. It's very critical, but the outer lip has to go. And that's what we're left with. It's not flawless, it's not even ideal, I would say, but there isn't an option on the market to retain the factory parking brake with this big brake kit, so this is what needs to be done. Modifications. Now, the edge isn't flawless, it's a little wavy in places, but again, you're not going to be able to see it, and I think, honestly, for a rough cut with a Dremel, it's not terrible. So now, I'm just going to scuff it up with some 3M, hit it with some semi-gloss paint, and then we'll throw them on the car and start assembling the parking brake. But I'll probably do a little mock-up before, just as these are drying. while that's curing for a little bit, I'm gonna mock up the parking brake shoe. The parking brake setup can be a little bit confusing. I find it's a bit easier to understand when all the parts are new. It's a bit easier to look at. So this is our guide. This is what the parking brake cable comes through. It mounts to the trailing arm and the dust shield. The cable comes through that center. It then goes to this mechanism where it is pinned in. When you are pulling up on the brake lever in the car, this is the mechanism that's engaging. When you pull up on it, it separates the two brake shoes, engaging them with the inside of the rotor. And that's how you get your park. That's how the car is being held. These springs, top and bottom, are what are creating the tension. These two little pins on each side, these are actually how it is retained to the brake dust shield. You turn them half a turn and it's locked in. It's not the most solid setup, but once the actual parking brake assembly is inside the rotor, it's literally not going to be able to go anywhere. And then lastly, this mechanism up here. Most rotors have a hole in them where you can put a flathead screwdriver and you actually adjust the parking brake with that little sprocket on the top. One side goes looser, one side goes tighter. Kind of have to fiddle with it and figure out what works for you. Every car is going to be slightly different, but I'm going to show you guys how to assemble this on the car. There's a lot of little pieces, so it's a little confusing and stuff typically ends up falling everywhere, but I think I've got it down to a science. So we'll wait for that dust shield to dry up and we'll throw this on the car. You can install the parking brake with the hub on or off. It's really a preference. I'm doing it with it off, more so for visual effects, so I can show this a bit easier. Otherwise, it's kind of tucked behind and definitely hard to film and sometimes hard to see. So first, I have both parking shoes, the top spring, and the adjuster on. This is what I found to be the easiest in terms of parts not falling everywhere. So this is just gonna hook right over the top. It should sit in place because the spring is on. And then what we're gonna do is take both our spring pins and insert them in each hole on each side and then turn them 90 degrees. This is going to retain the parking brake to the brake dust shield, and we can work around the bottom section a bit easier without it falling off. Once those two pins are in, you'll feel it's a little more solid. Now what we're going to deal with is the actual parking brake cable. There's this little mechanism here. You open it, slide the parking brake into it, pin it, this tiny little pin that costs $10 from BMW, and then set it between the two parking brakes in these two little indents, and then we can put the final spring in, and at that point it'll be all held together. It all goes on pretty simple, especially with the hub off. My preference is using an Allen key to pull the springs over. I see people use needle nose pliers a lot, but it messes up the zinc finish on the springs, which literally doesn't matter. You'll probably never see them again, but my preference is an Allen key for sure. Now I'm going to press in the hubs the exact same way we did the wheel bearings, so I'm not going to show the process again. Same tool, except on the inside I'm going to put anti-seize instead of high temp grease. We'll get those on and then we'll test fit the rotor to see how much we need to adjust the parking brake to make sure it is engaging properly. parking brake is adjusted and the brake rotors are on. With the parking brake, what I like to do is bring it out to the point where it's making pretty heavy contact with the rotor. It's going to take a lot of on and off with the rotor, but get it to a point where you can barely turn it. There's a lot of tension on it, and then back it off about 5 quarter turns. This should give you the perfect parking brake contact, and any fine adjustments you need to be making can be done from the inside of the car once the wheels are on, and you can really figure out how much tension you want on that lever. Rotors are on, screws are on. I'm super happy with the spacing between the brake shield and the rotor. It's perfect, worked out really well, which I'm happy with because I wasn't too sure. There wasn't really any information out there on this specific setup, but worked out good. AP Racing caliper brackets are on. They're torqued down to 50 foot-pounds, which is just the factory spec from BMW. Now I can throw the calipers on and we have our braking setup. This right here is the E30's new diff. This is a lightweight E34 casing, 315 gear ratio, LSD, 2 new clutches, Timken bearings, completely rebuilt and restored by Bavarian Diffs outside of Montreal. And as you can see, this thing looks better than a new one would from BMW, and it is sure going to perform a lot better too. Today we're going to get this installed in the car with a little help from a Condor bushing, Condor stud kit, and 1 random bolt. Instead of jacking the diff up into the car, I'm going to put it on this trolley and then lower the car onto it. Should be a bit easier that way, and I'll get a little bit of practice for when we have to do that with the engine. I always knew this car was going to take me a ton of time to get back together, as Quite literally every single thing is getting touched, changed, and upgraded, but I'm extremely happy with how it's coming together, and I think the vision is starting to become present. I hope it is for you guys, but when I look under there, that's pretty much the dream come true, and every little piece we add to it, it just gets better and better. So that's the rear end, 65–70% complete. Next we need axles and then heat shielding for the exhaust, and then we're going to redo some of the wiring just to clean it up. Next video you see on this car is going to be on the assembly of the S52, the final assembly pretty much before it goes in the car. After that, what is next? The transmission, need to do the detents and then get a clutch and flywheel setup, mount it to the engine, and then there'll be a full video putting the engine into the car. And I think that's going to be a pretty monumental episode and a big moment for this car as it's finally starting to see the finish line. And then there's little stuff here and there, like I have the wheels. You guys might have seen them in the background of this video or other videos, but teased them on the Instagram application, and I think they're going to be pretty cool on the car. So that stuff is all coming soon. Until then, I appreciate you guys watching.